Let's bring in General Jack Keane. He is just now coming from the Kremlin, saying that they have no confirmation, or this is coming from the Kremlin, they have no confirmation that Alexei Navalny, his cause of death. But what we're hearing, General, if you read some of the reports from the prison, they're saying that he was walking, he collapsed, and was unconscious. They were not able to revive him. What do you think? Do you believe that report, or what do you think happened?
Well, we can only speculate at this point, but I mean, the pattern of behavior is obvious. You've already discussed it. If you're an opponent of Vladimir Putin's and you're a serious opponent, you're likely to die. I mean, he's killed his opponents on the streets. He's poisoned them. He's imprisoned them, as he's done here. This is probably the most popular opponent he's ever had. And it's not surprising that he has met his death one way or the other, likely at the hands of Putin and his thugs.
You talk about courage, General. I mean, this guy was poisoned. He gets evacuated to Germany, gets revived, gets healthy, and immediately goes back to Moscow. He had to know this was going to be his fate.
Yeah, he's a very principled person, to be sure, and absolutely a man of courage. He certainly knew what he was facing when he got on that airplane and went home, and knew likely that he would be in prison. But he was welcoming that because he was taking a stand against Putin and what he stands for, and he was taking a stand for the people of Russia, a country that obviously he deeply loves and cares about. And he has a right to be a hero, in my judgment, inside of Russia, given his dedication against this thug and killer who's running the country.
You know, General, I'm just curious your thoughts as someone that's been following this for years. There does seem to be an escalation in Putin taking out his opponents. Now, we don't know if that's the case here, but if it's in line with Prigozhin and all the rest of the guys that he's taken out, why the escalation?
I don't see an escalation. I just see a continuous pattern, to be frank about it. You know, Prigozhin is obviously tied to the war in Ukraine. I would say that Putin right now, dealing with the war in Ukraine, while I deal with Dan in terms of what Ukraine has been able to achieve, Putin is somewhat triumphant right now. I mean, he really believes that what he has predicted is coming to pass, that the United States is literally taking a knee here on supporting Ukraine, and the Europeans, while not doing so right now, will eventually do so. And he looks at the United States in terms of it having political weakness at the national level and also a dysfunctional Congress, all of which he believes is playing into his hands. As such, on the battlefield, Russian forces are more aggressive than they have been in the past and likely to take the town of Avdiivka here in the next several days, while the Ukrainians, quite naturally, are husbanding their resources, not knowing what the future is going to be in terms of arms and assistance. And they're obviously in more of a defensive mode than they have been for 2 years as a result of the speculation surrounding the doubt and skepticism that they're going to continue to be supported. Look at what we're facing here, so people really understand. Yes, it's about the survival of Ukraine, but it's stopping Putin.
Yeah.
Stopping Putin. The Eastern European countries, to include what is taking place at the Munich Security Conference right now, the director of that conference, the former foreign minister of Germany, is telling his colleagues that right as we speak, Putin is preparing his forces for hybrid warfare in Eastern Europe, likely focused on the Baltic, similar to what we saw in 2014 in Crimea and then in eastern Ukraine. He is making those preparations. Why? Because of the confidence that he has that he's going to be able to take Ukraine, that the political will of the United States and Europe has broken, and he has broken it. And that is what he is doing. And listen, the thing we got to understand about Putin, he does what he says. And he's talked about Ukraine for years, and he's talked about the former states that were a part of the Soviet Union returning to the Soviet Empire. He has never given up on these things, and he's moving in that direction. We've got to wake up and take this issue seriously. And do many people in the United States really want to see Europe blown up like we're talking about here? Do we really want to live in a world where the Soviet Union, where Russia, Iran, and China are calling the shots, where they are the aggressors, they have the initiative, they have the momentum, and we're back on our heels? You can see what's happening in the Middle East as a result of it. You can see what's happening in the political will of the United States concerning Ukraine. And President Xi's aggression has increased significantly in the last 2 to 3 years. This is all related. We have to wake up to recognize the threat that we're facing simultaneously from China, Russia, and Iran.
And just so you know, if you read the Institute for the Study of War, which you put out, and you read everything there is, this isn't speculation. Vladimir Putin said it. He's already starting to infiltrate Moldova. He's already trying to solidify his hold on Georgia. Lithuania believes they're going to be attacked within the next couple of years. And all these, it's helping the Western, our NATO alliance, bulk up their military. But we're allowing this to happen. We're going to look back in 2024 and say, what were we thinking, allowing them to take a country that actually killed over 300,000 of the invading forces and destroyed the bulk of their navy, defying all odds?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, what the Ukrainians have done exceeded everybody's expectations, and certainly their determination, courage, the resolve of their people. We've got to keep supporting them. We do have an opportunity to stop Putin cold right here in Ukraine. That's the reality of what we're facing. And I hope we find the political will to do just that.
You're right. This is a reminder of what could happen if Russia continues to invade and take over. General, thank you for your service.
Just 1 second.
Real quickly, go ahead, Brian.
General Keane, what's your take now on what the fate of Whalen is and the Wall Street Journal reporter, Gershkovich? I mean, when they see this high-profile prisoner die at 47 from his conditions, it seems, what do you think the Americans are facing?
Well, I think the Americans are bargaining chips for Putin, and that's the reality of it. And I think he's going to make certain that they're properly taken care of. Certainly, a psychological health and physical well-being isn't what it should be. But medically speaking, I suspect he wants them alive so he can use them for his own personal gain in bargaining with the United States. I think that's kind of where we are with them. And certainly all the pressure that we can put on him to get our folks out of there is very appropriate.
Yeah. General, real quickly, you just went into detail why America should support Ukraine. Why is the White House struggle to make that case in an elegant way where the American public can understand why this matters?
Very good point, Lawrence. Something we've been saying for some time. The White House never has really made the case of why Ukraine matters to the American people, why it's related to our own security, why we're united with Europe in terms of our own economic prosperity, and the fact that stability and peace in the world enhances not only our security, but enhances our own economic prosperity. And it's been that way since World War II. He should absolutely have made the case. It's one of the problems we have. He doesn't have a strategy for an end state, but it doesn't mean, while we disagree with how he is voicing his concerns about Ukraine, it doesn't mean we shouldn't support Ukraine, even though we disagree with our president and how he's handling the issue. That's a mistake. Those who believe that, well, he's not giving us the proper strategy. He's only providing half measures in terms of advanced weapon systems, not in a timely or in a sufficient quantity when needed. If we walk away because of those reasons, then we doom Ukraine and we doom Europe, because we're going to face a war in Europe. We've got to get it in our heads. If we don't stop Putin now, he continues. We have to put more troops in there. We have to put F-35s in there that can deal with his integrated air defense system. We have to put stealth bombers. We have more ships that we have to put in there. We want to put 5 carrier battle groups out in the Pacific. We're not going to be able to do that if Putin takes Ukraine. We're going to have to resource Europe to protect NATO, and they're going to have to commit further troops to it as well. The cost is all going to go up, and we've got to see the reality in front of us.
General, have we seen something like this in the past when an election is approaching? Because Dan just reminded us that they have elections over there in March, in a few weeks. And, Alexei Navalny, he organized anti-Kremlin protests back 14 years ago. He started that blog where he was speaking about the corruption. He was an activist, and that's when he was imprisoned. But have we seen this happen in the past when Vladimir Putin has run in an election?
Now, the last time there was any pushback on an election was in 2011. And there won't be any consequences, in my view, to this in any significant way. So maybe some protests. Remember, but he has organized himself to stop protests at the beginning of the protests. And it's thuggery. There are the people who come out in the black helmets with the black bully sticks with them, and they immediately start beating on the protesters. He has learned that he can't let protests form in the streets. He won't let it happen here. And the people, by the way, every single day on state television, the people are being blasted with a false narrative in terms of why he's in Ukraine, to stop the Nazification of Ukraine, why he continues to be there, because it's the United States and the West that are aligned against him, and they are hunkering down, trying to defend the values of Russia, the values of Russian history, and the world is against us in Europe. And that's what we're fighting for, their liberty. That's just what the pollution that the Russian people get. Now, some of them have outside sources and really know the truth, but the truth is that many of the Russians are still supporting the effort in Ukraine, despite the casualties and despite the fact that it's now developing into some protraction. And why
can I
is
just
that?
piggyback on this?
Because they're supporting Putin.
How will Russia state television report this?
Well, I think they're just going to report it matter-of-factly as someone who died in prison as a result of medical causes and ill health. I suspect something like that. They're not going to provide any kind of narrative that would support the fact that there was some coercion here in his death.
Yeah, I know the family's going to speak out. They've been vocal, but if they speak out too much, they could have the same fate. So it's extremely tough for his wife and kids. Obviously, at 47 years old, you should not be dying of natural causes unless you're in a penal colony in Siberia by the Arctic Circle. Thanks so much, General. I think you outlined the case brilliantly. Also, a lot of people in Russia are not buying this. I think hundreds of thousands of military-age men have left, and they've locked up $300 million worth of Vladimir Putin's personal wealth. I don't think he's getting back.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.